Mass incarceration is one of the many dreadful problems being faced by the United States today. According to the NAACP, the United States constitutes 5% of the world's population and claims 25% of the world's prison population, which in more simpler terms means that 1 in every 31 adult in the United States is under some kind of correctional control. Now, these statistics beg the question that how did a country as free as the United States end up imprisoning 2.3 million people in the first place? It turns out that the prison population quadrupled in the mid-1980s under the Reagan administration. In 1986, Ronald Reagan signed a drug enforcement bill which specified a mandatory minimum sentencing policy which applied both on minor and serious drug offenses, also including various other petty crimes. Mandatory minimums reduce judicial discretion within the court of law, which prevents judges from sentencing fitting punishment to the offender based on the circumstances in which the crime was committed. For instance, a person can serve up to 55 years in prison without parole for a non-violent drug offense, such as the possession of 24 grams of marijuana, which ironically is way more than the time served by a murderer or a terrorist. The Reagan administration also introduced racial disparities in prison populations through crack minimums. According to Dr. Carl Hartz, crack cocaine and powder cocaine produce identical effects. But if that is the case, then why are crack violations punished more harshly than powder cocaine violations? Well, it turns out that the punishment for crack offenders is solely based on who the consumers of that drug are. And ironically, 80% of crack offenders are African American. This is also the reason why African Americans constitute nearly 1 million of the 2.3 million total population of incarcerated people in the United States. To me, this seems more like how the criminal justice system of the United States is racially inequitable and is solely responsible for the structural racism that is being faced by minorities today. In my closing paragraph, I would like to mention how the expansion of the U.S. prisons resulted in vast amount of capital, which attracted corporations and their involvement in the prison system. Now, the involvement of corporations in the prison system led to the emergence of the prison industrial complex. The prison industrial complex is in no way concerned with the rehabilitation of its prisoners, because if it was, then the rate of recidivism would not be up to 70% today. And now, in the end, I would like to end this presentation with a question, which is, why is it that even after serving their time in prison, ex-convicts are denied their lives as normal citizens of the United States? Thank you, everyone.
I will be talking about the new Jim Crow part of our presentation. The new Jim Crow is a name that became popular when a law professor named Michelle Alexander wrote a book called The New Jim Crow: Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness. She actually got the name from a protest sign in California. Michelle Alexander drew many parallels between mass incarceration today and earlier forms of racial control. When slavery ended, just 9 days later, Massachusetts passed its slave codes, which basically made it so that African Americans could be arrested for very minor infractions. African Americans were arrested in mass for things such as loitering, vagrancy, which is homelessness, and the equivalent of jaywalking. And then they were leased to plantations to earn their freedoms. And the time spent on those plantations were, of course, left to the plantation owners to decide. They were effectively re-enslaved, and this was called the convict lease system, and it led to the Jim Crow laws, which were based on the ruling of Plessy versus Ferguson and said that African Americans were separate but equal. But in class, we definitely saw that that wasn't true, since Brian Stevenson talked about how African Americans were lynched for things such as refusing to take off their uniforms after serving in the military and for forgetting to address police officers as sir. The new Jim Crow is fueled by the war on drugs, which started during the Nixon administration and strengthened during the Reagan administration. It actually started at a time when drug crimes were on the decline. In fact, Alexander found many scholars saying that crime rates and incarceration rates increase and decrease independently of each other, as in one does not represent what's going on with the other. Black incarceration rates rise regardless of whether crime rates are going up or down in any given community. Also, contrary to popular belief, people of color are no more likely to use or sell drugs than whites. The drug war has, in Michelle Alexander's words, been exclusively waged on Black and brown communities. The Human Rights Watch reported that at the peak of the drug war, in some states, 80 to 90% of drug offenders sent to prison were African American. The drug war was never about rooting out the violent drug offenders. In fact, the federal funding in the war has flowed to state and local law enforcement agencies that boost the mere numbers of drug arrests. Federal drug forfeiture laws allow state and local law enforcement officials to keep up to 80% of cash, cars, and homes that they seize from suspected drug offenders, which means that they benefit monetarily from the continuation of this war. Today, there are more African American adults under correctional control, such as jail, prison, probation, or parole, than were enslaved in 1850. As of 2004, more Black men were denied the right to vote than in 1870. More than half of working-age African American men have criminal records. These are forms of discrimination that existed during the Jim Crow era and that we supposedly left behind but are now legal once again once someone is branded a criminal. Which means that we haven't ended the racial caste system in America, we merely redesigned and rebranded it through the criminal justice system.